Looks like we have a quorum of members today and a number of people in the audience. So we'll get started first. If members of everyone has had a chance to review the minutes from the August 2nd, 2021 meeting, if there's any discussion or input regarding those minutes before we get a motion to approve them. Hearing no discussion, could I have a motion to approve the minutes from August 2nd, 2021?
Motion to approve.
Have a motion. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. Are there any members who are voting nay? So we'll do it this way, or against passing.
I'm going to abstain
Okay.
because I wasn't present.
Okay, no worries.
And I'll do the same. This is Adam.
All right. Hearing no nays, the motion passes. All right, thank you for getting that out of the way. We do have a pretty full agenda. We have one action item for consent or for voting to be voted on, which is the next item, which is the Community Corrections Biennial Plan, which is submitted by me, the Community Corrections Director. For those that haven't been part of Lipstick in the past, this is every biennium or every 2 years. This will be submitted, and this is really a plan that outlines the basic structure of supervision services and local sanctions to be applied to adults on supervision, sentenced or convicted of felonies, or designated drug-related misdemeanors on supervision in Clackamas County. This is submitted to the state and is part of our intergovernmental agreement to receive funding for that population. So it is high level. It was provided in the materials sent out last week. Really, a couple points. The dollar amounts listed there are 2-year dollar amounts with the exception of any carryover, which would be a 1-year dollar amount. It is very similar to 2 years ago with a couple notable exceptions. The Transition Center is no longer a program that we have, and so that has just been consolidated to pretrial, and our CSAT program has been consolidated to one building moving forward. Part of that was COVID, part of it is funding and a reduction in population. I would like to point out since COVID, so since March of 2020 to May of 2021, there's been about a 450 individual or reduction in persons on supervision in Clackamas County. So it's a pretty sharp drop in individuals being supervised that fall under this state-funded designation. Statewide during that same time period, that's about 5,969 individuals no longer that are not on supervision, or a reduction, I should say. Generally, we see some ups and downs as cases come in or cases leave supervision, but just going to add that. So there's a lot of reflecting back as we continue to move through COVID and a slowing of the criminal justice system, and some of that will fall into the presentation that we have later on in ballot measure 110 implementation. But I just wanted to point those pieces out and open it up for discussion or questions before we move on to ask for a motion of approval.
I had just a reflection or thought on page 19, talking about the program name Office of the Director. I didn't see a lot of alignment between the program description and the objectives. The program description seems to be the purpose of that program is or the Office of the Director is to create a culture, high performing, resilient, but then the objectives don't seem to really assess that in any way. Because I was thinking in terms of the county employee engagement survey, how it kind of gets at some of those. So I thought that could be a valid method of evaluation. And maybe there's some, ideas connected with that survey that could be part of included in the objectives piece.
A number of the items or the programs come specifically from our strategic plan. So in depth, yes, we rely on our plan on some survey work, and we are incorporating out of the last employee engagement survey. From the feedback, we've incorporated that in moving forward in communication was an area of focus. So yes, I think there's continued work in that. And this Office of the Director is really the agency's management team across the agency. So there's some high level goals there. But feedback is good to talk about that specific, what we use to evaluate the particular program, and highlighting those employee engagement survey and those results could be useful. Any further discussion items? If not, I would ask,
I actually have a
I see your
question.
hand up, so go ahead.
I have some questions about what the transition center kinds of services are going to be moving forward. I know that during COVID, the in-person interactions that people were having as they were transitioning out of jail to connect to community services were limited by, COVID protections and in-person interactions. And so now I understand that that's getting combined with pretrial services. It would help me a lot in my work as a judge to know to what extent there are warm handoffs or the ability to connect people who are leaving jail with things that seem really crucial that are community-based services, not punishment or correctional services necessarily, but community-based services, so that they can have what they need to be stable in the community and not come back to us through recidivism that could be avoided with appropriate community services. So I would love to get a tour of at some point, or even have a conversation with whomever can describe for me what the current offerings are, so that I better understand that when I'm doing my work.
So let me clarify that, so there's not confusion. The transition center and the funding for that no longer exist. So that as we saw it, it doesn't exist. The program had to be essentially eliminated. Pretrial continues to exist. The type of services we provided and continue to provide for the population releasing from jail, I have one PO embedded in the jail working on coordinating those services. Obviously, jail has been greatly reduced, so the amount of time those that are on adult community supervision spend in jail has been reduced. But we're still transitioning people to available treatment programs, to our own treatment program, CSAP, looking for those that are highest in needs, and those that come in that are on community supervision that need care coordination. We're looking for a variety of solutions. COVID obviously has created challenges with that, but certainly I'm happy to sit down with you, Judge, and we can have some conversations of what those continued services look like. We have resources, housing that we continue to make available to our clients that are on parole or probation. But everyone coming out of jail doesn't necessarily have that same access to walk into a center.
Right. And the thing that I'm noticing in part is for people who aren't going to be on community supervision, but who really need, they could really benefit from someone who is linking them to services that would really help them in the community, that would be voluntary. And I have noticed an important absence of that. And so I'd love to learn more about what the situation is and what options we might have to help fill that.
Certainly. I mean, outside of that fall under this community corrections biennial plan, that's a bigger conversation on finding the funding and resources to kind of dedicate to those individuals that are not placed on supervision but still releasing from jail or getting released, pending a case, and maybe on pretrial, may not, but just the opportunity to create more warm handoffs. Also, just diverting from jail too, and particularly looking for solutions regarding our population that's suffering from mental illness in the community and looking alternatives. There's a lot of work going on that. So jail is not the result, that we find an intervention prior to that for where we can. Any additional questions, follow up?
Malcolm, I have a question.
Yes.
Similar though, you said something about pretrial and another program that wasn't continuing. I just didn't, I'm trying to process that. What's not continuing?
In the previous biennial plan, we referred to the Transition Center was a program that we had geared some of our funding towards for transitional services. That is no longer funded. There's not the funding available, but I just wanted to highlight the change from the previous biennial plan. We talk about all our programs in here, those that are funded by state funding and those that are funded by Justice Reinvestment, to kind of encompass everything we do. But the purpose of this plan is to highlight where the state funding is allocated. So we're allocated every 2 years a percentage of funding from the state for the population that is on adult felony supervision, post-prison probation, and designated misdemeanors. So it's a highlight of everything, but really the focus of this is to give a high-level view of where that funding will go over the next 2 years.
So just a comment from our perspective at Oregon Department of Human Services, managing the child welfare program is, I think the pretrial program, I'm not in your world to know like how you have to make the priorities, but I think the pretrial services can often be really, really critical in child safety work that we're doing, because we'll get a child welfare case where there's a child abuse charge pending, and maybe there's pretrial release or domestic violence that's impacting children, and being able to kind of contain the access of those parents until we can adjudicate those crimes and find out what the level of safety is with kids. It's been a really kind of recurring theme for us lately. So I just want to at least say how important those are, and I don't have the perspective to say in comparison to those who have been adjudicated and are in supervision, but it's a relatively small investment, but it's really critical. And if there could be more, I think it would be great.
So just to clarify, Seth, the money for the funding for pretrial comes strictly from Justice Reinvestment. It's highlighted in here, but the state funding that this plan focuses on cannot fund pretrial work. So that program is strictly Justice Reinvestment. So I understand the piece on it. So it's kind of a narrow focus, like when we've reviewed our Justice Reinvestment application and what is geared. So we are doing some work that way. And in the Justice Reinvestment plan that was approved by LIPSIC and is before the Criminal Justice Commission for final approval, has some funding in it to work, to have an individual that we can contract with to do some engagement with individuals coming out, particularly suffering from a substance abuse disorder when they're released pre-trial, and kind of work with that population to engage. So there is some there, but that is on the Justice Reinvestment side.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. I'm not trying to grill you over the proportions there. I just wanted to call it out to the whole group that it's despite how important that can be.
It's good for clarification, so no worries. All right. All right, if there's no further discussion, I call for a motion to approve the community corrections biennial plan and move it forward on to the Board of County Commissioners for final approval on the IGA.
I can move to approve.
I have a
I'll
second.
second.
Thank you, Seth and Adam. Members, is there anyone that voting against or voting nay? Hearing no nays from the members, the motion passes and moves forward. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the questions and discussion on it. On to our next agenda item with a couple pieces coming from a couple of different individuals. I will pass it over to Seth on the Advancing Racial Equity and Public Safety Work Group. Do you want to start, Seth, and then I can close, or do you want me to start?
Maybe I'll just start because I'm going to have to pass back to you and Adam for the details on each of these opportunities. But just to update the larger group that as the subcommittee has met in the last few months, we've been able to review and meet with the team from USC that Adam was able to support, doing a kind of a literature review around how other public safety entities around the country monitor their racial equity performance. I think we got some really good initial information, and I don't know, maybe Adam, you could do a better job of me than to summarize a little bit of that. And Adam's been able to support having another group of students kind of take it to that next level, really with the hope of getting us to start kind of a data system or dashboard that allows us to assess system performance based on the information that we have and can gather easily. So I would pass to Adam to talk about that. And then there was the I think it was Justice Reinvestment money that Malcolm's been working on trying to get a contractor. So we've got a proposal to do that. I think just to summarize, and other people in the work group can weigh in, I don't think anybody feels like we've got all of the work kind of happening that we want to see happen. But I think we all also realize as we got started that it's a more complicated endeavor to measure a system's performance this way, and all of us have full-time jobs. So getting these outside resources to help move the work forward has been critical. And I think we've also found out, that perhaps we've been a little bolder than some other systems around the country in terms of being willing to ask the questions. And so I guess that has to be a little bit humbling in terms of maybe it'll take us a minute to get where we want to be. I don't know, Chief Schmerber, if you wanted to add, or anybody from the committee wanted to add a little bit of perspective just generally about our conversations to date, and then hopefully Adam and then Malcolm can report on these new resources that hopefully will move our work to the next stage.
No, I don't have anything else to add, Seth. Thank you. I think you covered it, and unfortunately I think I missed the last one. So just been extremely busy with some other issues going on here. But no, I think Adam's really taken the lead in this, and it's very much appreciated. I almost feel like we're dumping it all on Adam to a certain extent. So I guess we owe you a cup of coffee, or at least lunch. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. I pretty much took it on myself, so I don't feel too much pressure from you guys, but I appreciate you all actually being open to really dive in and invest some time and energy to support these student projects. So just as a quick reminder from earlier this year, I was approached by some professors from USC, the School of it's the Price School of Public Policy, and that's where I did my doctoral work. And they were looking for projects. The master's students need to have a capstone project to complete their project or complete their program. And so they asked for a project. And so in the summer, we supported a group of students to sort of begin the process. of identifying, helping us develop a data collection system. The idea was in our group, we said, where do we start? If we want to determine whether or not there's systemic racism, or identify where there may be some challenges, where do we even begin? And so that led us then to recognize the importance of having a monitoring system that really looks at the system broadly, looks at different components of it to identify where there may be some inequities that will guide how we focus our attention and how we address the challenges that are there. And so we started with a summer project, and it went pretty well. They did some initial surveying of the landscape and came back with some great case studies for us to look at. And then this group is going to do a little, so that was a little bit like a deep dive into specific cases. And this group for this fall is going to do a broader assessment, recognizing that especially since last summer and the George Floyd movement, the Black Lives Matter protests, that there's likely quite a bit of activity that was generated by those movements, and some of which may have been published, but we also know that takes a long time to go through peer review publishing process. So just looking and saying, hey, is there stuff that's been published? If not, where else? What are some other good sources? And then surveying that and coming back with some actual concrete recommendations on what data we can measure, how we might collect the data, et cetera. So that is the gist. We can get more in the details if you'd like. But we invited the students to come to this meeting, and they are with us. So if you don't mind, I'd like them to just briefly introduce themselves. And just so you know, later on in the fall, we will have an opportunity where they will be presenting their results. And so we're going to do our best to find a time that works for everyone. But just to let you know, if you see an invitation around this project, hopefully now you'll be able to connect the dots. So I'll just go ahead and call on folks. I see Liz has taken her turn of video on. So would you mind just briefly, just maybe 20, 30 seconds.
Thank you, Dr. Freer. Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Liz. I'm one of the members of the USC Capstone team, along with Kat Fan, Noni Romero, and Bryce Steves. And we look forward to working with you all. Thank you for letting us listen in today. And we're going to produce hopefully some very helpful tools and recommendations for you all.
Thank you, Liz. And Bryce?
Good afternoon, everyone. As Liz said, it's a pleasure to be here, and we've really got a lot of good research going on right now that we hope to analyze and give back to you guys so we can help you guys in any way that we can with those indices and other matters.
And Kat.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. Excuse the befuddled look. I'm taking care of my newborn niece right now. So in my free time from that, I am super excited to be collaborating with the whole team. I have a personal connection to Clackamas County. So it's nice to, I guess, be back, even if it is in a virtual capacity. So really excited to be here, really looking forward to sharing all the amazing work the team is going to produce and hoping that it moves Clackamas County in a way that I know all of the folks here wanted to.
And we have one more, Noni Romero. Scott, are you able to let her in? She was having problems with her video, but maybe we can hear her audio. There she.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm at my work desk right now. I don't have a camera here. But my name is Noni Romero. I'm also part of the Capstone team working on the racial equity indicators for Clackamas for this semester. And just kind of to echo what my other teammates said, I think it's an issue that's really important to all of us. And As you also mentioned, Dr. Fair, something that's emerging, something that we're still learning a lot about. So we're excited to find out as much as we can and bring that to you in the next couple months.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for coming. And that's all I had to say, unless there's any questions about that.
I have one quick question, which may be like totally like not even relevant, but I'm wondering if the equity study is, just some clarity, is that around an equity study of the services that we provide, or an equity study of who's hired to provide the services?
At this point, it's not a study of Clackamas specifically. It's a study of what are different indicators and measures that people are using across the country to assess the equity in their public safety systems.
And is it the equity that this around the programs that these systems provide, or is it equity around who is is it the system of provision of services, or is it the system of who's hired to create the services?
So Emily,
I
think what you're doing is really bringing some of the conversations we've really spent a lot of time on in the work group to the full group. So I appreciate the question. I think what we're trying to do is ask the question, what data would tell us how the system is performing? So certainly each component of the system, say an individual police force or Malcolm's team or my team, et cetera, how we're composed and what outcomes we're producing are a component of the system. But how do we know how equitable the system is? How do we know how much race and other identities are predictors of good or bad outcomes across the public safety system? And while we all track lots and lots of things, at the DA level, at the individual, the 13 chiefs level, and other systems, how do we answer the question, how is the system performing? What are your chances of getting, an equitable opportunity based on your identity in Clackamas County? We're trying to sort of answer that question. So would that lead potentially to, are we staffed appropriately? Are individual decisions at intersection points happening the way they could if we were different? That's the type of information we hope to get down the road, but it's really starting at that high level. And again, it's almost as if you were there for those conversations that we've been wrestling through. So I hope that helps.
Well, thank you for clarifying my confusion. You said it much better than I did.
Hi, I just kind of want to follow up on that. I think it's an important question, how to bring the richness of some of those conversations that happen in the work group to this larger group, given the challenges of a sometimes very busy agenda, but maybe that's something that the work group can talk about, because I think they are important conversations. And like you said, Seth, we all have full-time jobs, but this is the work of all of us at the same time, making sure that we get to the equity. And so how do we bring that into the space here? I know that I was really impressed with some of the information that the students provided just about how those conversations went with community and what elements were important to create that trusting environment. So hopefully we can bring some of that forward, and the students can bring some of that forward as we move forward.
Okay. Well, thank you, Adam, for the work you've done, and Seth. I think the work group really has some momentum. I think the final piece here, there was material provided that went out last week And what I've spoke to the LIPSIC before about was the Criminal Justice Commission allocating some funds for us to utilize in helping us to develop at least an equity action plan, and from that, an equity plan for LIPSIC. I am engaging with a contract with the National Policy Consensus Center at the Hatfield School of Government, who is really a recognized leader in collaborative governance. They've done work with other LIPSICs throughout the state. They've done work with Clackamas County. Most recently, they did work including the Willamette Falls Locks collaborative projects. I think what you will see is a multi-phase outline, and then the first phase outline for the work that we'd like to accomplish. So that will be more time for us that we'll need to meet as a group, but more time individually as we move this forward to really move the work and have the dialogue at LIPSIC, but have input from members and from the agencies, organizations they represent, and also to start that kind of community, some outreach in this first phase also, and get some input there. So definitely work to be done. I wanted a chance for the members to see what the National Policy Consensus Center has put together. Outside of those that are on the committee already and have a chance to have dialogue about that, if anyone has some concerns of what they've outlined. But really, it is a collaborative process to kind of move us forward and have this dialogue and develop that action plan so we can move forward with a full equity plan for LIPSIC is the goal. I'm also working with the Criminal Justice Commission to continue the funding to carry it over into the upcoming biennium, so we don't lose out on this opportunity on the funding side. But outside of that, certainly if there's questions that come up on this, reach out to the members of the Racial Equity and Public Safety Work Group so we can have that dialogue, or certainly everyone's welcome to join that work group at any time to have some dialogue of what's happening. But I think there's a lot of good work coming out of that, and moving forward, you'll see more.
Welcome, this is John.
Yeah.
I just want to just make one real quick comment, and actually it's not even a comment. It's a thank you to the students. So I appreciate your guys' work and effort you're putting into this. It's very important work. So thank you again.
Okay.
Yeah, I would echo that. And also just to say, as you all look at the proposals here, a big thank you to Malcolm, who, this is not an easy environment to find a contractor to do work in this area. I think with current events, everybody that does any manner of equity consulting has 10 companies looking for every spot that they have in their agenda. And I think there's something really foundational to the proposal, which is to kind of get us all started with some strategic direction around this, which is at once unsatisfying in some ways, when you want to have something really tangible that you can move on, but it's also probably the right approach to get us that foundation before we kind of move off into another direction. I think it does work in tandem with what the students are doing, and excited to see the next phase of that. And just one specific thing that we had hoped to get to with a consultant is really a way to kind of channel community voice, so that we're not just looking at data, we're really engaging with the community about how we're doing in these areas. And they referenced that as kind of a future phase. And again, unsatisfyingly, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I just encourage you to kind of process all that information with that in mind.
Thank you, Seth. We'll move on to our final agenda item. That'll be our presentation on Measure 110 implementation by the Health Justice Recovery Alliance. And I'm going to turn it over to the Director of Outreach, Ron Williams.
Hello, thank you very much, Malcolm. It's great to be here. I want to thank Elizabeth White for being instrumental in us coming here today. We had a number of conversations, exchanged a number of emails, and she was extremely helpful and very positive about having this happen. I'm really grateful to her and all of her efforts to bring us here. So I'm Ron Williams. I'm the Director of Outreach for the Health Justice Recovery Alliance. I'm here with Billy Nooneman of Lines for Life and Tara Hurst, who's the Executive Director of the Health Justice Recovery Alliance. And I'm going to, at this point, share my screen, and then Tara's going to take it away.
Thank you, Ron. I guess it's good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having us, and echoing Ron's comments about Elizabeth. What an incredibly, it was a pleasure to have been working with her. So we're the Health Justice Recovery Alliance, and basically we're the organization that is ensuring that ballot measure 110 is being implemented on time and as the voters intended. So really centering the key components of measure 110. The first being taking drug use and substance use disorder out of the criminal justice system and moving it over to the health services system, and really making sure that that is a robust plan, as well as investing in the communities most impacted by the war on drugs, which in Oregon is Black, Latinx, Indigenous, Tribal, and Native folks. So that is, we are about 75 plus organizations are part of our alliance. This is a reflection of many of them, but not all of them, or else you wouldn't be able to read anybody's logo. And we also have a policy table that we work with on a weekly basis that's really focused on providers, and especially culturally specific and linguistically specific providers, as well as other advocates, where we work through policy determinations to make sure that what we're talking about will really work on the ground and not just kind of in theory. We want to make sure that what we're advocating for is something that will benefit and support our providers, especially our culturally specific providers and our linguistically specific providers. So with that, the Senate created a Senate Judiciary and Ballot Measure 110 implementation group last session. That's where Senate Bill 755 was worked. Senator Przanski, the chair, created a legislative work group that we sat on, as well as all stakeholders that are impacted by Measure 110. So that was your community corrections folks, the police chiefs, the DAs, the public defenders, judicial department, kind of everybody that you all can think of was probably sitting there in one way or another, including youth, or at least people who serve youth, et cetera. And so together we worked for, I think it was 3 work groups a week, focused on criminal justice and health services, and then all together to create recommendations and basically fill in a lot of the unanswered questions or holes that a ballot measure can leave, just because you can't answer everything in a ballot measure. And it was really a pretty great experience, which I don't think I've ever said about a legislative work group. And we were really pleased all walking out of it together with some, important changes. So here are some of the things that happened, in case you all weren't sitting and listening and reading the 40-some page bill. The first one was, so Measure 110, if you remember, had these things called addiction recovery centers that were going to be in every CCO region. So that was about 13 regions. And a lot of people felt like that meant that there was going to be these shiny new brick and mortar treatment centers built in 13 spots across the state. What about community organizations that are already doing this work? And it didn't feel representative of what the intent was. So as a group, we came up with behavioral health resource networks, which you'll hear us refer to as burns for short, because it's a mouthful. And instead of it being in CCO regions, it's really about being one in every county. And for counties, we really mean the geographical boundary of a county. The intent of the measure is to make sure that every community has access to these critical services, and a burn has access to housing, peer support services, low barrier treatment options. So that could be outpatient, or also for folks who are indigent or undocumented, who don't have access to insurance or OHP, and harm reduction services. So those are the services that we and the voters wanted to see in every community, and that's what a burn will be made up of. There can be multiple harm reductionists, there can be multiple peers delivery, but you have to have at least one of those to create a burn, which won't be as much of an issue for probably Clackamas as it is for other counties that are serving a smaller population in a bigger geographic area. The other thing that the Senate Bill 755 did was it created, it directed the Oversight and Accountability Council, which was the council that the measure created to oversee rulemaking and the funding priorities. And it's primarily a group of folks with lived experience and or providers, addiction, medicine, doctors and researchers. And Ron is actually the tri-chair of the Oversight and Accountability Council. And they are prioritizing their funding, ensuring that organizations, again, that have been most impacted by the war on drugs are receiving the most care and funds to make sure that we're really investing in those communities. We also, the measure was silent on the tribes, and so the Senate Bill 755 is ensuring that the 9 federally recognized tribes and tribal affiliated organizations are make sure that they are getting funding from this. One of the other things that was silent in the measure was what happens if a youth gets cited. And this was a robust conversation. We actually, Molly Rogers from Wasco County, who's also amazing, pulled together a youth work group to really work through that. What is the intent? We definitely don't want youth getting stricter penalties or being punished where adults and in adult court. So this basically said that any youth that gets a violation would go through the juvenile system so that they would have access to the services, and the burns can also have services that serve youth. So hopefully we can see some investment in there, since we know that a lot of our youth services have been lost lately. The other component that we're working through with law enforcement is ensuring that the law says that they have to provide the information on how to obtain a screening, which Billy will talk about in more depth, but this is not making it an option. It really needs to be something that, if this is going to be a pathway to recovery and harm reduction services, we want to ensure that they have a pathway. And then there's a very robust audit section for the Secretary of State that was written with their office to make sure that it made sense and was kind of on a similar timeline as what auditing that they do as well. And then I'll move this over to Billy, but this is the citations at a glance. This comes from the Judicial Department, and this is from February 1 to August 31st. And it gives you an idea of how many have gone out. It's about 1,200, and just the CJC had come out with a report that there's about 8,900 folks used to get cited for small possession of drugs. And now we're down to about 1,200 violation cases as of August. So it gives you an idea of kind of the change And we recognize that COVID is also something that's probably changed some of the numbers as well. And Billy, I don't know if you wanted to take it from here.
Yes. Yes, I can. I'm just making sure. Hold on one second. Okay. Like Ron and Tara said, everybody, thank you for having us today. I appreciate everybody's effort in letting us come today. And Elizabeth, appreciate her efforts, even reaching out to me before we were even scheduled for this to talk about 110 and what it looks like in Clackamas. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the screenings and verifications that we've had to this point. So you can see down that third bullet point, it says 7 assessment screening verifications received by the courts. To this point, we have completed 50 screenings for individuals. We're seeing there's the numbers aren't reflecting that because initially all these e-violations were going through justice, municipal, and circuit court, and OJD was only able to capture data for circuit court, but now with 755, all of those e-violations are channeling through circuit court, so we'll be able to reflect better on people who are handing in those screenings. The other thing is as we were going through and looking at some of this, all the completed screenings that we had done to this part, we had found that we were seeing examples of somebody who entered court and they had $100 fine. And then between that and when they left, that fine was gone. But it seemed like maybe court clerks or whoever wasn't, and I'm not sure if it's a checkbox or not, but essentially they weren't checking a box saying verification, measure 110 verification letter received. We also realized that a certain part of this is going to be folks that are failing to appear, even with getting the verification letter, which is why what Tara and Ron and their work and my work with doing the screenings and talking to people is really trying to get them connected to peer services, because then we have somebody who's working with that person and who can get them to the appointments and who can talk to them about those things. Earlier, you were saying what are some ways to connect people who are not going to be on supervision post-incarceration, but we're still trying to get them connected to services. For a large part of that, peer services can be the answer for that, and working with those agencies in your community. I've been working closely with 4D, who just opened up peer services in Clackamas County. So I'm certainly, open to meeting with you all about that and what that looks like in your community. If we could go back one slide just quickly. Yes. So this is showing the court cases with Class C violations by county. Clackamas is at 0, but I think you all may be falling into maybe one of those data crevices that we've been identifying, because to this point, I have received and completed 5 screenings for individuals in Clackamas County. I've had 2 from Sandy, 1 from Clackamas County Sheriff, 1 from Canby, and 1 from Oregon City. Another kind of success story that I would like to talk about in Clackamas is the first department to reach out for additional palm cards was from Malala. And I will talk about the palm cards now, if we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So when we were contracted by OHA to provide, to build like kind of like this first phase of getting people screened. It's all done by telephone, as the Oversight and Accountability Council and everybody are working to like get those burns set up. Everything to this point has been done through Lines for Life's call center. One of the things was how can we need to create something for law enforcement so that as they're giving out these citations, they can have an additional kind of info sheet to give to people so that they can know where to call to get this fine waived. What we came up with was this palm card. We sent those out across the state based on contact information that was given to us by OJD. Lines for Life printed up 25,000 of these and distributed them across the state. So what we hope, like the kind of golden thread of this, is individual gets a citation, officer writes citation, gives them the palm card, person calls, we go through, we assess for initial safety, any acute needs that a person may have in that moment, and then we move on and have a discussion about their use. We employ, for our screening process, we use an SBIRT, so screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment screening tool, and specifically we use a DAST, which is a drug abuse screening tool. After that, we talk to people about any other issues they may be facing, like we were saying, like housing, employment, anything like that. And we just talk to people about options that they have or resources that they may want. We ask right up front if they would like to be connected to peer services or to harm reduction services in their communities. And we will work with them on an ongoing basis as kind of a case manager until they get connected to those resources that they're looking for. And that's it on my end. Thank you.
Thank you, Billy. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what's already taken place from the perspective of kind of some advocacy the Health Justice Recovery Alliance has been involved in. Last year, or when the law was passed, once we formed, we developed our own policy tables, a criminal justice policy table, a health services policy table, and then a steering committee made up of primarily culturally specific organizations and their leaders. And as we move forward with our conversations, it was clear to us that there was this huge kind of urgent need to get resources out to the community right away. The HJRA, we began meeting after the law was passed with the governor's office, key members of the legislature and the Oregon Health Authority. And so our advocacy, based on what we were hearing from the community, was to do everything we could to encourage the folks in the legislature and OHA to get some money out to the community for these providers, particularly culturally specific providers and treatment organizations and recovery organizations that were providing services all over the state. And so we were able to get out, through our advocacy to get the leadership of the House to actually generate some funds. And we're able to get $30 million out to the community kind of in two separate chunks. Starting in April, the Oversight and Accountability Council did a RFGP. There were over the response was overwhelming. Over 115 organizations applied. The total request was over $40 million. But we were able to go do like a $20 million and then a $13 million RFP, and to get money out. And these numbers just kind of represents the number of organizations. There were 70 organizations funded around the state with this money. There were 26 of the 70 of those organizations in 26 different counties. and it kind of breaks down where those counties were. There were 33 service providers expanded access to treatment. 52 organizations hired peers, 32 organizations added housing, and 30 organizations increased harm reduction services. And so that was a really valuable and important lesson that we learned by listening to the community, is that take what they're saying seriously and do what we can to move resources out. And that's still happening to this day. And this kind of breaks down. Tara, did you want to talk about this part? Just kind of walks through some of the organizations that receive resources in the Tri-County area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Ron. I mean, this basically, most of the organizations that applied for funding listed the Tri-County as, you know, primarily who they were going to be serving. Some you'll see is only Multnomah County, some is Multnomah and Clackamas. That was that 4D that Billy was just talking about. And this gives you an idea of who applied and was awarded those initial early funds. It's also important to note that, you know, these were, as Ron said, were funds that happened across the state. That's fine. So you can kind of see the diversity of who is able to expand their services. So Ron, I think we can, yeah. So this goes over kind of other places across the state who also got service or funding. And we just like to show kind of that this wasn't just a Tri-County, although on this call that might not have been as big of an issue, that this is, you know, services across the state. And then, you know, I think the biggest thing that Measure 110 is going to be able to do is moving forward, the estimated amount of money that's being moved into the Drug Addiction Recovery Treatment Fund, I think, or Drug Treatment Recovery Fund, that the measure is set up is about $302 million. That includes a little bit from the opioid settlement. That also includes a little bit of rollover from the biennium before. And that's $302 million to invest to help burns be set up across the state in all 36 counties. And that is really the 5 times the amount of what we currently spend on non-Medicaid services. So that's the housing, harm reduction, peer support services, and low barrier treatment. And hopefully for what Judge Leininger was talking about, that will really help fill some of that need for folks who are transitioning back into the community. This is a kind of a timeline of what we've already done and where we're at. So if you see in September, the temporary rules for these burns were presented, and those are on the OHA website. And we can also share those with Elizabeth or Malcolm, whoever we need to get them out to you all, so you can take a look at it, because those are still available for public comment and input. The RFGP for the burns should be out in October, and with the goal and what the law says is by January 1 that burns will kind of be established, whether that means that they know they got the funding and then it's a time to start setting them up. And we recognize that this, because we want this to be a successful process, we need to also take some time to make sure that it's done in a thoughtful way. And there is a system-wide assessment that is happening through OHSU and the Alcohol Drug Policy Commission, looking at basically where we have services and where they're desperately needed. So hopefully that won't be out in time for this first round of grants, but it will be available to help kind of give a good overall picture as the OAC is doing their work and as these other behavioral health dollars are coming in from the legislative investment on where we should be investing. I think that's it, Ron?
That is it.
There you go.
Thank
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep. No, this is the opportunity for any questions that you have from the presenters.
Yeah. So first of all, great work. And just saw the timeline was really helpful too about upcoming RFPs. Is that the best way for providers to get involved with the burns, and is that limited to those 4 components of harm reduction, housing, peer support, or reduce or lower barrier treatment, or does that also include screening, like screening specifically for culturally specific providers?
So two answers to 2 questions. So the second part of your question, when you added screening, that's absolutely correct. So screening and assessment, along with harm reduction, housing, peer support services, and low barrier access treatment, which could be like medicated assisted treatment, detox, sobering. Those are the sorts of things we consider low barrier access treatment. And could you repeat the first part of your question?
Well, is the RFP the best way to get connected?
Right. So the Oversight and Accountability Council currently, we're on 2 tracks basically, or we're doing 2 things simultaneously. So once the temporary rules are posted September 1st, then we began the permanent rulemaking process, which of course involves establishing a rules advisory committee, notifying the legislature, then beginning a process to have a public hearing, and then having public input. So that process is continuing in terms of establishing the permanent rules, which takes place over the next 180 days. But we hope to be done by the end of December with our part of the permanent rules anyway. And what's happening simultaneously is the RFGP for the burn, so the Behavioral Health Resource Networks. So we're in the process right now by this week. The Oversight and Accountability Council is going to be having a discussion where they're going to talk through the application and then take an action to adopt the application, and then it'll go through the process of getting posted and announced by OHA and their Office of Procurement, the Health Services Division, with the intent of having that process open, having the proposal open for 4 to 6 weeks, and then closing the opportunity, and then doing evaluations with the intent of having those grant agreements out and signed no later than the 2nd week of January. So we are on a pretty aggressive track. The Oversight and Accountability Council is to get these burns established by the beginning of January. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it.
EA Wentworth, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm going to ask what I think is a tough question. But as you know, there's a lot of skepticism about ballot measure 110 and the positive effects it'll have on our community. I understand that there are a lot of people who believe a lot in ballot measure 110 and what you're building. So I don't want you to take what I'm about to ask as a criticism. I just want to call out what I think is out there. And that is, you brought up close to 1,200 Class E violations that we know of since February. Half of those people haven't even bothered to come back to court. And so far you've served 50 people, but invested $30 million. So if I'm going to advocate for this program out in the public, how do you reconcile those numbers? Because any of the people on this call would love $30 million to serve 50 people, but we don't get that. We don't get $30 million to serve 400,000 people in Clackamas County.
Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to take the first crack at this, and then Ron and Billy, feel free to jump in. I would say that looking at these numbers, what we're trying to do is just show a transparent, like, here's where we're at, here's what's happening, but the picture doesn't tell the full picture. So the $30 million, you don't need a citation to access those services. And what those have done, as an example, there was a recovery housing in Wasco County that was closing due to lack of funds, run by Bridges to Change. It was a very trusted resource in the community. And because they were able to apply for those early funds, they were able to keep that housing open. And it has nothing to do with whether or not they're serving folks, whether they got a citation or not. So I think it's important on some level to pull those two things apart, because there's no wrong door for the access to Burns and to these services. And so you can't really go with the 50 people and the 30 million. You could probably, and Billy might not like this, take a look more at a Lines for Life contract and say, okay, we've answered 50 phone calls. How much are we paying for that? And that would be more of an apples to apples comparison than the 30 million to the 50 people. I still think that it's important to recognize we're doing a huge system shift. And we all know that not everybody was excited about this shift, and there's legitimate concerns around what will there be the safety net for folks, and will there be access to the services that people who use substances will need if we're taking away one of the interventions we've all known how to do before. And that's one component of it, but the other component, and I think the part that Ron and Billy and I are excited about, is that we're building a network of peers, of housing, of harm reduction services, and of low barrier treatment. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I know how important it is to have access when it's time to have access and when you're ready. And we don't have that in Oregon right now. And so for us to not try everything that we can and to invest $300 million in our communities across the state, as our overdose deaths, and we all know what the results of not addressing this issue are and not putting those kind of funds in. So I would just be cautious to not look at those numbers and then draw too many conclusions other than we know 1,200 citations have happened. We also recognize that working with Billy and OJD and OHA on how do we make sure that it's a more seamless process of getting a screening completed to the court and not necessarily relying on somebody who may or may not have access to an address or a way to get their kind of ticket turned in is what we're working on. And since we are making such a significant shift, it's going to take time. It's going to take law enforcement and the courts and OHA kind of figuring out how do we make sure that we're creating a more seamless, just more back-end transaction. We still need a citation that is uniform across the state that really says, okay, you got a citation, here's what you need to do, similar to what we see on a speeding ticket or other things, to make sure that this is a well utilized. And once we've done that for a while, I think it's fair to look at the numbers now too, but to start drawing maybe more conclusions from what we're seeing. That would be my.
Yeah, and I can also speak to the fact of, like, the line is also, we're getting calls from people who don't have citations, like people who I've talked about Malala earlier. We had a call from Malala where an officer knew somebody in the community who was struggling with, who has a history of struggling with substance abuse, and they just gave them a card and said, call these people for help, right? So, like, we're seeing calls like that as well. Like Tara was saying, I'm working with OJD to be able to file directly for the person, so that as soon as they complete their screening, they can have that filed directly to the court. That way, we're taking away that barrier of, like, people who don't track very well or anything like that. So yes.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that in terms of the way the behavioral health resource networks are going to be set up, one organization will essentially house the screening aspect, but in every member, every every partner of the Behavioral Health Resource Network, who's a service provider, anyone in the county can go into any of those providers and get access to the screening and to the services. So there's no wrong door. And so it's not so much folks are going to be funneled continuously to the call-in line. People can go directly to a provider in their community once the services are up and running.
Right. And, you know, I think that's another part of this is like, this has been a little bit of a heavy lift to like get this up and running with a phone number where we have like all of these like different like bureaucracies trying to like figure this out and see how this best works. But like, as we get closer to those burns up and running, it's like, now you have it coming out of like everybody's distinct community knows how to communicate with their distinct community rather than like, you know, we're trying to like blanket the whole state and, you know, connect with, you know, all these like separate law enforcement entities and everything like that. So yeah, so like as this becomes more and more like embedded in your county, like the numbers will reflect that.
Mm-hmm.
If I could ask too, what I'm hearing is, I know a lot of people who are, I tried to get treatment, but it was 2-month wait. And by the time, you know, 3 weeks in, I was done and I just used. So I'm anticipating that part of this ramp up is I need treatment today and I can get it today and I don't have to wait for 2 months to get into treatment.
That's certainly the goal. And part of, I think, what is unique about 110 and what I think will actually, you know, ultimately hopefully make it successful is that we're relying on peers, and that's really a best practice. And it's about having peers connect that person with services. And if they're not able to connect them at that moment, they're still at least in contact with somebody who's knowledgeable about what's out there, what's available, been through a similar circumstance, and can be there, unlike so many of the, you know, the rest of the community can, because they're really coming from a place of lived experience. And that can't go underestimated. It's really critical in order to meet somebody where they're at and start planting that seed, even if it's not somebody that's ready that moment. So I think that ultimately, yes, we don't want waiting lists. We've got a really long way to go, and I don't want to sit here and promise that we're going to eliminate waiting lists. We'd need a lot more money than $300 million, and we need the federal government to do some serious Medicaid reform. That being said, we're investing in systems that have not been invested in, that are known to work. And that's especially investing in the community, helping the community find access to safe housing and to harm reduction services at a level that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is the housing component, you know, being able to ensure that when the peers are doing their outreach, that the organization they're connected to has access or to emergency or transitional supportive housing or recovery housing. You know, that combination, being able to get people situated somewhere with support, is the key element. So it's peers plus housing connected to a program. That's the thing that gets people moving in the right direction, in addition to harm reduction services. So housing is just as important as peers. I just want to make that case.
Mm-hmm.
We have a couple more questions. Christina, you had your hand up, and then back to DA Wentworth.
Yes, I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank you all for being here today to share this information. I asked Evan Elkin to be here today to listen in, and he just got moved on to the screen. He's the director of Reclaiming Futures at Portland State University and did a lot of work at the legislature regarding juveniles and the impacts of Measure 110 and really trying to figure this all out. So I think, Malcolm, you said you have to go to public comment. So I just wanted to point out that in Clackamas County, we are one of 3 county juvenile departments in the state that is doing a Measure 110 pilot. And we're really, really wanting to work with our community-based organization that does our diversion that already handles minor in possession of alcohol and less than an ounce of marijuana when that was an issue. The other big thing that hasn't come up, there's a lot of talk about the adults, but really the intersection with the schools where, the kids spend the majority of their lives in school, hopefully. So if you want to, Evan, if you just maybe say hi so people can see your face, and you'll get a chance to talk with and meet some of these people later.
Yeah, great. Hi, nice to meet you all. This is a great discussion. I know some of the faces, Tara and Billy, I've seen I was on the working group with Molly Rogers. And the idea of looking at different strategies for youth emerged from that working group. And we're looking to do, as Christina said, a community situated pilot of using screening and brief intervention as expert in a way that's, motivating and enticing to young people who don't have a $100 fine hanging over their heads. And so that's been our specialty in some of our work, is how do you channel the positive youth development strivings of a kid, incorporate family and situate in community, and mesh that all with the goals of a juvenile department, which, as we know, for the last 25, 30 years has been about partnering with communities and doing more diversion. And so it's a long-term qualitative pilot to see what kinds of adaptations juvenile departments can make around this new measure. So we're just getting started.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to DA Wentworth before we go to any public comments.
Malcolm, I know you're concerned about time, so I'll turn my question into a comment. It would be nice when you do this presentation to talk about the 50 people and what the outcomes have been for them, because if you're getting housing resources for those folks, or they're getting drug treatment, it'd be helpful to see those numbers and how that's playing out. So there you go. I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you. That's helpful.
All good questions. Scott, let's open it up for public comment and give the opportunity. I know you didn't have any yet, but it's great.
We still do not have any, Malcolm.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask a question of the presenters on when these treatment agencies or contracts, when we establish these programs, are there components to evaluate the programs moving forward, metrics they have to meet, or kind of the checks and balances side for creating a substantial increase in programs in the state of Oregon?
Yeah, there's quite a few. The audit section, this sounds very wonky, but I really would encourage folks, if you're into that, to read it, because it took us a long time as a stakeholder group to come up with kind of what are the metrics and how and when should we be looking at them. But that is one form. We actually OHA just pulled together a group of stakeholders to go through data collection and metrics and what does success look like for Measure 110. And I will give OHA props for reaching out to providers and to the community and not just kind of doing it in a bubble. Hopefully we'll be able to get better information on how are these systems working and how are the providers being assessed. And then I don't know, Ron, if you have anything to add on kind of from an OAC perspective, how you're able to keep people accountable to what they put in their grants.
Well, that's kind of the language that the Oversight and Accountability Council is using performance-based grants as the way that we're describing how the RFGP is going to go. And the only other thing I'll mention is that Senate Bill 755 has a pretty robust kind of measurement section. And so as you read through there, kind of what are the projected or desired outcomes of the law, they lean into it pretty well, kind of exactly what it is that they're looking for, or what the legislature wants. And I can send that around in terms of the actual Senate bill if people want. And I can also send around the temporary rules if people want as well, because they pretty much they start to lay that out as well.
Very good. Well, thank you for the presentation. We have 6 more minutes if there is another question or anyone wants to follow up. Christina?
I did put a question into the chat earlier about community-based organizations and if they could form a consortium and apply together. So for example, different groups in Clackamas County, nonprofits getting together and applying.
Yes. Yep.
Yes, absolutely.
It's encouraged. I mean, that's part of the network idea, is to make sure that people are collaborating and working together. So a peer would know that, okay, this person, you know, they received money for these services, there's openings, and you know, creating much more of a network in the county and not one by one.
Yeah, once the RFGP for the burns is announced, then the OHA is going to do a series, or at least I don't know if it's a series, but they're going to also announce these educational webinars for providers and officials and interested parties to come and learn about kind of what it is that we're looking for and answer specific questions, with the idea of having breakouts by county so that folks can come together and start to talk about kind of what collaborating at the county level or organizations in a county working together collaboratively to like come to an agreement about services that are going to be provided in that particular geographic area.
Great.
Hey, Malcolm, is there time for April to share a little bit about the burns? And
that's where I was headed. I didn't forget her.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. April here, and I'm with Clackamas County Public Health. And I just wanted to give a little bit of an update on behalf of Mary Rumbaugh, our Behavioral Health Director. She's on a very well-deserved vacation this week. So I've had the pleasure of sitting in a group and giving some support to the group of substance use disorder service providers that Mary is convening in Clackamas County. We've just had 2 meetings so far, but the whole intention really is to bring together folks to start mapping out what services are available in Clackamas County. One, to better look at where the gaps are across the county geographically. Also looking at adult versus youth provided services, and then those that are culturally specific and relevant. And then 2, to also leverage the existing efforts that are already underway in our county. So that initial mapping has happened. And at our second meeting, which was I think just a week or 2 ago, Mary provided sort of a brief snapshot of what that looks like. The next step from here is for us to come together shortly after that RFGP is released and to do exactly, I think, what maybe Christina asked about, which is to talk about who intends to apply, which of those service provider elements will that organization be providing, and what does that look like geographically, and then equity-based services and youth-based as well.
That's really exciting, April.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll just follow up with that. If anyone in this group would like to be a part of that conversation, now's a really great time. Feel free to just shoot me your information in the chat and I can send it along to Mary when she's back from vacation.
Thank you, April. Well, thank you and great for the presentation, everyone, on the ballot measure 110 and answering the questions that we had. I appreciate it. And have a great day. Thank you, Lipstick members and those in the audience for attending today. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
I just wanted to say I'll gather the resources that were mentioned from, so anybody who mentioned anything, please send it to me and I will send it out to the Lipstick members. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.